Welcome back to the Call to Create podcast based at Open Space Event Studios in Bend, Oregon. Today I get to sit down with Marcia Morgan, Ph.D., consultant, researcher, trainer, and author on gender and crime. And we're here with a guest that I am very excited about, as you heard in the intro, Marcia Morgan, who this podcast, this episode means a lot to me because Marcia's work has really affected me in profound ways. We'll get into that when we get into the episode. And today we're talking about two of her books. So we have what is the book that meant the most to me, a book called Go, How to Get Going and Achieve Your Goals and Dreams at Any Age. And she also has a newer book called Should I Change My Name? Which I don't know anything about except what you talked about in all the conversation we had before we got started, but the impact of your last name on identity, marriage, and happiness. Marcia, it's awesome to have you here. This is, I have been so excited about this episode and getting to sit down with you. Everything you see around you with this show is a direct result of your book. So I have to give you huge credit for it and huge thanks.
Oh, great. Thank you.
I have reams of highlighted sections and notes, and the effect this book had on me at a very specific time in my life about 2 years ago when everything kind of fell apart for me. And that is when I encountered you, and I came up to you I came up to you at a reading you were doing here locally, and I just remember, with tears in my eyes, and I was like, because you target, you sort of, this book is aimed mostly at young women and adult women, and I came to you and I was like, can men do this too? Because I was really in a dark place and really lost, and the point of this book is how to rediscover, ask yourself the question, what are my dreams and goals and aspirations now? And this book helped me rediscover what those were, and what the sort of hands-on portion of this book is all about is then how do you get out of your own way to get going and achieve those goals? Yeah, is that what you would say? Is that a pretty good summary of how this works?
That's a great synopsis. Yeah, that's great. And it touches me. I'm thrilled that it was a helpful book.
Yeah, and it was far more than that. I actually created, so for those of you that don't know, and you should definitely get the book, but the book focuses on what you call goal objects, which are creating a display of objects that are physical embodiments of the goals you want to achieve. Yeah, do I have that right? I hope I'm not getting all of this wrong.
No, and it's whatever you want it to be too. So there's no right or wrong. The GO stands for goal objects. It's an object or objects. Some people have a display, some people just have one object that represents or symbolizes the goal that they want to achieve. Some people put something on a key ring, or some people actually make a display almost like a vision board, a three-dimensional vision board kind of thing. It can be anything. We can talk about all the different fun things people have done because they send me pictures, which is really kind of fun. But yeah, whatever it means to you is symbolic to you is what's important, because the research shows that if you see something on a regular basis, you're reminded of that, you're more likely to focus on that, whatever it is in your life. So if every morning you're getting up and brushing your teeth and next to the sink is this little scale of justice because you want to go to law school, or it's a little dog because you want to open a doggy daycare. You're going to think about that, and your day's going to kind of be filled with thoughts about how can I make that happen. So yeah, that's a long explanation, but
No,
yeah, that's what a goal
great.
object
And it's
is.
one of the highlighted lines in here that I have is, and it's a phrase that we've all heard in some form or another, but where your attention goes, what is it? Where
Your energy flows.
Your energy flows, right. And I have had for the last 2 years on my bathroom counter a little object that drives me to make this podcast happen. And there are other objects, as you describe in here, like whatever your goals are, you can have objects that remind you of that goal. And so I have other objects as well, but one of the biggest is an object that symbolizes this show. And so
And
we're
here you are.
here as a direct result of the work I did in this book. So
Oh, that's great.
again, thank you for that.
Well, it's a simple concept, but I kind of took several ideas to come up with it. And one was looking at altars, which have been around as people think of, in a religious context. But altars are created all over the world for different things. They're often for rites of passage or honoring someone who was born or who died or whatever it is. It was the idea of having things, symbols, for that, and it gives a certain energy. The people give the energy to it. It's not some magical thing that the object, radiates energy.
Right.
I don't want to be too woo-woo on that, but it's a really simple concept, and then kind of the vision board, because it's things you want to have in front of you. So it's kind of been out there, but not in this kind of context, to have it specifically about your goal. Some people like to get a goal object, like at a Christmas store, or maybe just going through the box they have in their attic of Christmas objects, because or ornaments. There's a lot of different themes now, that's a really great place to find objects for yourself, or maybe just around your house, or at a thrift store, or a craft store, or nature. Maybe if it's a pine cone because you want to hike the Pacific Coast Trail. I don't know, whatever it might be. So there's no right or wrong, as I said earlier. It's just whatever works for you.
Well, and what I like about that distinguishes it, or at least in my mind makes it different from just like a vision board workshop or something. I mean, like you say, those get a little squishy, and they get a little kind of woo, and for someone who has like, whether it's someone who has like hardcore business objectives or professional objectives that they want to achieve, there's a distinction here with the objects, in that it is, as you say, for each person, it can be a completely different thing. And that can be sort of squishy and natural and woo, if you will, or it can be something very hardcore and very focused. There's something about it being an object versus versus like a vision board, which I have only once kind of tried to do, and was like, yeah, okay, it sort of played a role in the moment and then got set aside. Whereas with this, as you say, you specifically say, like, put this in a place that and it can be public, but it seems to be more about the individual, so that you see it on a regular basis, every day. And it reminds you, that physical object reminds you of a thing you want to accomplish.
It's kind of tangible, yeah.
Yeah, there's a distinction there versus, at least for me, maybe it also depends on what resonates with you. Like for me, having physical objects made it more concrete, made it more physical. So
I think you're right about the, I don't want to say that vision board is passive, but it is a little bit more than what I'm intending in the book, in that another part that I tried to incorporate is the business aspect, the business action plan kind of thing. And I hope that isn't too intimidating sounding. It's not, but it's something when you're looking at your object or you're trying to figure out, what's my next step here in life. I have a little chapter in there with a chart that just has, okay, what do I really want to do? It helps you break down the goal, helps you break down the resources, and those resources are not just money. They can be, Aunt Martha, who, has always been supportive and can loan you a camera, or I don't know, maybe Aunt Martha doesn't have a camera, I don't know. But there's people that can really help in ways too that aren't just money and helping things. So that part of it is a piece of that goes very closely with the goal object. So it's not just sitting there.
And the thing that I think, again, makes this different and much more actionable is you spend time, or you, through the book, you get the reader, and it just, what I like about this is you're not just reading the book, it's a workbook. There are things you need to sit down and write about and think about and put on paper, and you spend time getting people to look at, how do you get in your own way? There's a phrase you have for it in there, but what are your...
Sabotage?
The way you self-sabotage.
Right. Yeah.
And sitting down and really objectively looking at that for myself made me realize, oh, okay, there are very clear ways that I sabotage myself right from the get-go with any project I have. And consciously becoming aware of those things and putting them on paper then it becomes much easier for me to see those things when they come up. When they sort of rear their head again and go, this isn't going to work, or here's how you're going to undermine yourself, and I'm like, no. Not this time. I'm going to try and, now that I'm consciously aware of those things, I can offset them. So. Yeah,
it's true. You're more aware of what you're doing, your own behaviors, or people around you that might be sabotaging, your dream that you really want to go for. Or it may be that if you get into this self-sabotaging thing, that you need to adjust that goal. Maybe it really isn't a good fit.
Right.
So it can serve some purposes, but it's being mindful of what's going on as you're going for your goals.
Right.
Yeah. And I have to share just a little bit about why I even started this book, because it's evolved. My background is a criminologist, and I have worked for 45 years in various capacities around the country, and some work overseas as well. And I specialize in gender and sexual violence kinds of issues. And so I've done a lot of work in prisons, women and men's prisons around the country, started looking at an experience I saw consistently with the people who are doing time. And that was what I call dream drain, that they may have had dreams at some point and they just lost them. Obviously, if they're in there for 5 or 10 years or something, you can understand why that would happen. But a lot of people never grew up with dreams. I mean, they truly were living 5 minutes at a time ahead of them. They couldn't think for the next day. They didn't feel worthy of their dreams. I'd say that's probably the biggest thing. So I started looking at the dream drain thing, and I developed a little class, a little workshop kind of thing for some of the women in prison to look at the dream drain and figure out how they could kind of get out of that and really try to make something that they want for their lives, something that's healthy and brings them joy. So I started doing some of these activities and started sharing it with some of my friends in the community, just talking about what I was doing. And I found that so many of them, men and women, have dream drain.
High achieving professionals.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that at the reading you did 2 years ago.
Yeah.
High achieving professionals, men and women, who came to you and were like, I feel this exact same deficit in myself. And that was how you kind of knew that you were on to something bigger. Is that?
Right. Yeah. So I started doing some workshops for people around Bend, actually, and just kind of getting their feel for it. And it was a 3-part workshop, so we kind of talked about some of the things in the book at the beginning, and then they went out and got goal objects and brought them back in, and then we shared, some of our own, experiences with the self-sabotage, perfectionism, which is, huge for many people. They don't start, or they're afraid to start doing something because they can't get it right the first time, or afraid to fail, and all those kinds of things. So the workshops went really well, and so I just decided I'm going to put it down and just create a book for everybody.
Right.
But like you said, there are a lot of examples in there for women,
right? Because there
are some unique things. The way men and women are socialized around the perfectionism thing in particular. So it is for anybody, but there are a lot of examples for women.
And then, this kind of blew my mind. Like when I was looking at what you're up to now, because this to me, like I felt like there's this. What I love about this is it's not overwhelming in physical size. It's not some huge tome that in order to get going, you first have to read 500 pages. Like this is, it's accessible, it's short, it's actionable. There are things to do, writing to take part in, and help you sort of get started. And I thought, okay, I sort of felt like if I had been asked to guess where you were going to go next, it would be a follow-up on this. But no. Instead you go, should I change my name? Which at first I was like, how are these two things in any way, shape, or form connected?
Written by a criminologist.
By a criminologist with 40 years of working and researching criminals and their motivations and how they got where they were. Yeah. And then it goes to how should I change my name? But as we were talking beforehand, it became really clear to me that this is about identity, and it's about the loss of identity and the loss of self, and how to... I'll let you sort of explain how these two are connected, because as we were talking, I was like, oh, okay, I do see where these two overlap in the kind of that Venn diagram of purpose and stuff. Yeah. So I'll let you talk a bit about how this came about. And what blew my mind is you said this has been in your head since 1973?
78.
1978.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very thick file of clippings since that time period. When they used to have newspapers where you could actually clip. I would say that my life passion and my career, this is a logical progression in my mind, that I've always tried to look at giving women a voice. That's probably one of my biggest passions. And to a degree, giving people who are, I don't want to say less fortunate, but people who are the underdogs maybe, a path out of that.
Okay.
So I've always been interested in criminology since I was in 7th grade and started watching television programs. It sounds very shallow, but about 7th grade in my era, there started to be some police women shows on TV. Uh-huh. And I thought, oh my gosh, policewoman, or the girl from Uncle, or I'm really dating myself here, but there were these shows which you never saw women in that kind of role. So I decided, and I had a very wholesome, intact family, great childhood, but I liked the excitement of law enforcement and trying to make sense of this underworld, you might say, or this life that people have or they get into that it doesn't make sense to me. It's not my world, but I didn't want a do-gooder kind of thing, but I wanted to understand it and then hopefully help people kind of out of that. So I did go into police work. My first job was as a sworn officer for an all-female sexual assault unit. This was in Eugene, Oregon. Although it sounds pretty commonplace now, there were not many women at all in law enforcement, and I could probably write another book about that experience.
Well, and that kind of task force was probably cutting edge. It was probably unheard of almost.
It was. There was like one in New York.
Filling that role. The first that role even existed, but that there were women filling that role, right? I mean, that was unheard of stuff, right?
And it was an exciting time. We went to the Oregon legislature and changed laws that are still on the books. We went to hospitals and set up procedures and developed rape kits so they could collect evidence. And I traveled around the country and, tried to help other departments set up, similar kind of programs. And, the whole idea of being sensitive to a woman when she came in, to listen to her story at least, where before, what were you wearing? And, it was really pretty awful. So it was a good time. It was a lot of good social change, I think, at that point. And during that time, my my colleague in that team and I developed the Anatomical Dolls. They're cloth.
Yeah, this is something I'm intrigued by.
They're cloth dolls. Are about this big, and they have all the correct sexual body parts on them. And children who've been sexually abused can take the dolls and just demonstrate what happened to them. They don't have to have the right words, or they may not know the right vocabulary, but they can show what happened on the dolls. And then they take the dolls to court, and so the jury can understand. It's just a demonstration aid. So we developed or started a company in 1980, my business partner and I, to have the dolls manufactured, and they came in 3 skin colors, and I wrote a book on how to do forensic interviewing, that was translated into several languages. And then I think we have the dolls in like 40 countries, and so we would try to follow the dolls to the countries and do lectures and training on how to use them correctly. So that happened kind of really early in my early 20s.
Wow.
So
that's a big achievement. That's a lot to do in your early 20s.
Well, it was kind of interesting. So I was about 27, I think, when we had our little company going, and I'd left law enforcement at that point, and I was going to graduate school, kind of juggling a lot of different things. But it felt really, it just felt like we were making a difference. And I kind of kept thinking, what if I peak at 27? And what's left out there?
Right.
Can I make a difference? I hope so. So I kind of shifted a little bit to working. Most of my clients were in Washington, D.C. I should probably mention that too, that would have me do trainings and stuff. So the Department of Justice, National Institute of Corrections, had me going to a lot of prisons, because most women in prisons had been sexually assaulted. So it's like this kind of complete circle of working in the early stages of helping with the cases on into now these people who had been traumatized were now into drugs or whatever to numb themselves. And, it was very connected. So the last many years of my career, I haven't really been working with children and that kind of thing. I've really been working with adults in prison system, and worked for 3 years in Miami-Dade, and that's, they were having a lot of sexual assault issues in their jail facilities. And so, it's that kind of thing that it's just kind of evolved. So fast forward, trying to summarize 45 years here.
No, all of this is fascinating stuff.
Yeah.
I don't have to skim over any of it.
Oh, well, it's been a good ride in some ways. So about 2 weeks before the pandemic hit, I decided, okay, I'm going to semi-retire. I'm not going to do all the travel in airplanes. I was doing a lot of traveling.
Okay.
And just not really do the consulting stuff, but just really do more writing. And since I'd had the name one in the back of my brain since 1978, I really wanted to write that one. So I wrote that one during the pandemic. I had it all ready to go and just sat down every day and for hours and got it written. So that's why it just came out. But it is about finding your voice still. It's not saying one you have to keep your name or you don't, but really understanding you have a choice and then making an informed decision.
And so is this targeted or aimed, or were you, who were you writing for, I guess is the question here. Is it men, women, researchers, therapists?
For the name book, it's for men and women, although, kind of the elephant in the room with married last names is that the burden falls on women. Mm-hmm. And the worry, I'd say, is one of the biggest things. About 3% of all men change their name when they get married in the U.S. So it really, I think, will probably be for women. However, it is for same-sex couples too, mm-hmm. because they're going through some of the same questions. But anecdotally, there's not a lot of good statistics right now, but anecdotally, most same-sex couples just keep their names.
Okay.
And it's interesting because you take out the gender history of men and women, mm-hmm. and the idea of women having to change their names by law to be property of the man. So that's taken out in same-sex marriages. So
right.
It is kind of interesting. Some do change their name, but...
And when we were talking before the show started, you said something that kind of, I thought I understood, but I was totally wrong. And you said for most cultures, the woman taking the man's name is not the norm.
Yeah.
Is that right?
The majority of the world, women do not eliminate their name and take their husband's name when they marry. It's predominantly in like the United States, United Kingdom, parts of Canada, although Quebec, women have to keep their names. So they have to keep their names. Italy, they have to keep their names by law. Greece, they have to keep their names by law. Australia, they do. They're much like U.S. and the UK. But Middle Eastern countries, Latin-based countries, Asian-based countries, they don't eliminate their name.
And so, what is the name structure like after they get married? Do they just keep their name that they had before they got married? Or do they incorporate the name of their spouse? Or does the spouse incorporate their name? How does that work?
Rarely does a spouse incorporate the woman's name. That seems to be somewhat universal in some of those other cultures. Okay. And all of them are a little bit different. I mean, there's some Asian and some Latin-based cultures where you do add on the name, and oftentimes the mother's name at the last surname at the end, and the man's name in the middle. Yeah, and then like in some Asian countries, they don't call it the last name because it's not last. They put their surname first.
Okay.
So I was using the word last name or that term, and people go, no, you don't call it last name because it's the surname and it's the first name, not the last. So anyway, every culture is very different, but I think it's interesting when we think, oh yeah, that's what you do here. We're a very changing society, and about 25% of women who get married keep their maiden name or surname. I don't call it maiden name.
Right, yeah, like that too has its own baggage with it. Maiden.
Right, well.
Maiden name.
Yeah, it means an unmarried virgin,
right.
Basically. And I always have this picture of somebody with a pointy hat with a scarf, going to a castle or something. I don't know. But it doesn't apply in,
right.
many same-sex marriages and things. So, but most people use that term. Anyway. Yeah, so it's when we kind of think about what we do, I mean, not just the traditions in a marriage ceremony, like who gives this woman away. I mean, it seems very quaint, but it really was based on the law of coverture, which is what the UK and the US had, which meant women were legal non-entities. And a lot of that was up until the 1980s in our country.
Really?
Yes. And women.
Like you think, oh, that was so long ago.
No, it wasn't. 1980.
To us, that doesn't seem that long ago.
I know. Really, that's very true.
It's just a couple of years ago, people.
In dog years, maybe.
Right, yeah.
I think it was 1983, Maryland wouldn't allow, up until 1983, Maryland wouldn't allow women to vote if they kept their names.
Really?
Yeah, and that was Maryland. I mean, there's a lot of laws that changed in the 70s and 80s that kind of chipped away at it. Women couldn't serve on juries until the 1960s. they could be.
Like nationally or just?
Yeah, and there may have been some pockets that were.
Okay, you're kind of blowing my mind with that. I didn't realize that was.
And it was all based on this law of coverture, which meant that if she married, she became one, which is a lovely thought, but the one was the husband.
The one was actually him, not her.
So if the husband left with the children, she had no rights, because anything she produced, money, children, anything like that, belonged to the husband. So all of those laws kind of started getting chipped away too, but in our recent history. So it's interesting. And then, of course, the name was kind of a piece of that, and the suffragists worked on that issue a lot when they worked on the right to vote. Yeah.
Wow. I had no idea that it wasn't just about the name. I mean, I knew it was like when divorce and situations like that there was a lot of imbalance in how that power played out, or how possessions played out, or whatever. But I didn't realize that, like you said, they couldn't even serve on juries up until the 60s.
Yeah, you couldn't testify against your husband because property couldn't testify against the owner. And I mean, there's just the laws. When you start, there's a section in there on the history, and it's kind of fascinating. So I guess I'm getting back to your question that you asked. Who was the target of the book? And like I said, it's for people getting married. But I know there's a couple of universities are looking at it to use as a textbook, because it talks about that history. And if you're a history buff, it really is kind of interesting, especially around marriage history and that kind of thing.
So what's kind of the state of things now? I mean, because you kind of blew my mind with some of the legal ramifications of this that were present up until the 60s or the 80s even. Like, where do we stand now in terms of women's rights and marriage and property and all that stuff? It seems this is coming at it from a completely anecdotal perspective that I don't know anything about this stuff, but it seems that we're in a much better place, a much more balanced place legally, financially, all of those areas. We're in a much better place now, is that right?
Yeah, we really are. I mean, anybody can choose any name that they want when they marry. I mean, they can keep their own, they can hyphenate, they can use the maiden to middle, where she puts her maiden name as the middle name and the husband's as the last name, create a whole new name. I mean, there's 6 common options, and I present all of those. And I interviewed a bunch of couples, women, men, heterosexual, same-sex couples, and wrote down what they thought about all those people who had hyphenated names. What were some of the pros and cons to that? So as I talk about the 6, you get little quotes from true life people that, this really worked well, this didn't work well.
Oh, cool.
This is, what my in-laws thought. So it's all about choices now. So people can have informed choices now.
Is there still kind of a norm? Is there like the thing that most people are still doing? Or?
Yeah, but absolutely that women are still taking their husband's name. That's still, like I said, about 75%, but we're seeing a trend with millennials who have lived, many have lived together before they've gotten married and realized having different names is not that big a deal.
Right.
And they don't necessarily want the hassle. Not that many years ago, if a woman changed her name, she had to go to DMV and Social Security. And now, I list in the back of that, there's 3 solid pages, single-spaced, of all the places you need to change your name. I mean, it's a very complicated world. You think we've simplified it with electronics, but so it is a hassle. And lots of times there's, you get to be retired and you realize, gee, when I changed my name in the 20s, somehow Social Security never registered that. Anytime you change your name, there is the likelihood that something could go goofy somewhere.
Right.
So anyway, it's just balancing all that, what you want to do. Yeah, and there's also a part in there on children, because I think a lot of people, what do you do about kids? And there are a lot of different ways to incorporate the feeling of a team and being a unit, and without necessarily going a traditional route.
Right, so it's, right, I can see where that becomes an issue of if if the two partners, to make it a non-gendered thing, each keep their last names, how do you handle that with kids? And then do the kids get is it confusing for the kids to be like, well, your dad, or you're both my parents, and yet I only have one of your names. How does that play out with kids?
Well, I think more and more people that I interviewed who had kept their names said that it didn't make the marriage stronger or less strong. Some people think, well, the marriage won't be as strong because you have a different last name. That seemed to be a universal thing, that it didn't matter what your names were. A family is a family. It depends on how that unit is bonded together, and names didn't make that much of a difference. Although some people try to give both surnames to their children, like the child's middle name might be the mother's surname and the last name may be the father's, or vice versa. Some give the female child the mother's last name. Some give the male child the father's last name. Some use a parent's surname as the first name of one of the children. Like my last name is Morgan, and Morgan is often a first name for people. So there's some ways to keep the names kind of all connected and feel like a team and a family.
And okay, so then my question for you is, it seems like there's a strong connection here in the underlying themes between the two books, because a lot of this has to do with with Go. It's like especially since that was mostly focused on young women and adult women that either never had dreams or have lost their dreams and lost their aspirations. Is the connection there that by changing that when women specifically change their last name, they kind of there's a loss of identity and a loss of dreams and aspirations that goes with that? Like, is that kind of did you see that crossover in your research? Did one play into the other, or are these kind of separate animals?
I guess it does now. I hadn't thought about that, so I'm glad you brought that up. I really hadn't thought about that, but I think you're right. I interviewed quite a few people over the years. There are some women, and in most of the situations, that couldn't wait to change their names, and they wanted that new identity, and they were very happy with that. And so there really is a component that people are like that.
If I can interject right there, do you find that, because it sounds like a lot of your research with female women who are incarcerated, who have a criminal background, that what led them to that was trauma in their childhood. Is that right?
Most often. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Is that also tied in with wanting to get rid of that family identity as well? Like they want to put that behind them in every way possible?
That is an interesting part. Yeah, I heard that from not necessarily women in prison, but in the community, of people who said, I wanted to keep my maiden name, but I had a deadbeat dad, or I didn't have a good upbringing, and I really wanted a fresh start. And so there were a lot of people who said they didn't want a connection with that past. And so names can do that. It's a new identity.
Right.
That, or the witness protection program, you can get a new identity that way too.
It's kind of, is that what marriage is for something?
That's right. No. There is that component that people do want. But what I was surprised about, I did interview some people, some people like my age in the community, some women's groups I belonged to as I was working on the book. I said, what are your thoughts about, a lot of them had been married for a long time. I was shocked how many women said that they had regrets of ever changing their name. I really was not expecting that. And I'm not saying it's the majority, but there were a lot who said, I just didn't know I had an option, and if I had to do it over again 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I wouldn't have changed. And that was an eye-opener for me. Yeah. On the other hand, I will say it's an emotional topic, and I have found that people who have made a decision, and everybody, has a right to whatever works for them and makes them happy. But people get very defensive when I mention about the book, if they've already made a decision. Well, I did this because, and I hope that people just feel good about their decision. I don't want people to feel like they're being challenged.
They're being judged for the
Right.
decision they made or something
Right.
like that, right?
Yeah.
Right. Huh, okay. So the last question then is, this, like I was saying before, this seemed to me to be these two, initially my reaction was these are two wildly different topics, but actually they're very interlinked. Where does this take you next? Like, is there some other thing that's been in your head since 1977 that you're like...
There's a lot of space over there. I keep a lot of things.
Like, is there a way, is there the next project that you have kind of planned or thought through?
I think I'm done writing for a little while.
Yeah.
Writing the book is fun, and it's a lot of work. It's like a term paper, when you have to do
Right.
a lot of the research and referencing and things. But a lot of it is the marketing these days. I mean, no matter what publisher you have to put in a lot of hustle.
Right.
And so it is a lot of work, and that I'm not crazy about that piece of it. So I don't know about the writing. I've kind of toyed with maybe something fiction, because I've only written nonfiction. I've written about 20 books through the years. Most of them are government kinds of books.
Right, looking at your bio, it's not light reading. It's pretty...
Yeah, unless you've got insomnia.
Like, okay, it's deeply important stuff, but it's very specific to the field you've worked in of law enforcement and incarceration and how to manage what your research has shown you is the best way to manage that experience. Especially for female inmates.
Yeah. So, and I've really enjoyed that, but I thought, well, maybe I'll challenge myself in a while. Yeah.
Take a break for a little while.
Yeah. It kept me busy during the pandemic. It was my project during the pandemic. So.
And as we're kind of slowly easing out of pandemic lockdowns and stuff, maybe you're just like to get out in the sunshine for a little while.
And see people.
Interact.
If we know how to do that anymore.
Right.
Yeah. So, I'm not sure what the next project will be, but we'll see.
Cool. So, where is the best place that people should find you and find these books?
You can get the books on Amazon, libraries, bookstores, or bookstores can order them for you. And I also have a YouTube channel, and people can find me there, and Facebook too. So
is that, if they went to YouTube, just search Marcia Morgan?
Marcia
K. Morgan. What's the?
Yes, actually, there's. Who knew? I think there's like about 5 or 6 Marcia Morgans.
Yes. There's another Charlie Teal that.
Oh, is that right?
Took up all the social media stuff, and I'm like,
How funny! Yeah, there's one I think just got arrested for cruelty to animals or something. It's like that's not the one.
You're not that Marcia Morgan.
No, not that one. Just put my name and Marcia's Marcia.
Marcia.
Yeah, Morgan, and then just put like the name of the book. That will probably get you there. Either book.
YouTube or Facebook.
Right, they were fun. I've done I think 3 videos now for the Should I Change My Name book. I went to a bridal store and talked about the history and the suffragists and all that stuff. So that was a fun one. But anyway, it talks about the different names and choices.
And do you have a specific website that you point people to for yourself?
I do. Sorry, that would have been a good one.
No, that's all right.
And it's Marcia K. Morgan. Middle initial is K. Yeah, altogether.com.
MarciaKMorgan.com.
Right, and then that can also link you up to Amazon.
Okay.
So.
Perfect. Thanks for this. Like I said, you had a big impact on me when I was in a very skewed, dark place, and Go kind of helped me. It directly helped me figure out what was next for me, this next chapter of my life. So it's been awesome, and to get to sit down with you one-on-one has been. I've been very excited about this day.
Oh, good.
Been looking forward to this for a while. So thanks for coming in.
Oh, you're welcome, and I'm so impressed with what you've done. That's really
Yeah,
great.
thanks. Yeah, well, I could ramble on more about the neat thing for me as I was looking back at what I wrote in this book 2 years ago is I'm like, you know what, it's time to do this again because I've got new goals, new aspirations, new things that I need to be clearly focused on. So
Yeah, that's true. I'm always updating my Go display, revisiting it.
I was gonna ask if you had your own Go display. That,
Yep, I got a little cabinet at a thrift store for $2 or something. It's really cool. It has little glass doors, and I just put these little things in there that, and I have it right by my desk. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Marcia, thanks. This has been amazing, and I will send everybody to marciakmorgan.com. You can also find you on YouTube, and your books are on Amazon and bookshops and libraries.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us. The Call to Create with host Charlie Teal is presented by Ghost Village Films and captured at Open Space Event Studios in Bend, Oregon. Subscribe and follow on YouTube, iTunes, and thecalltocreate.com.